Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Dasha Burns. It is Tuesday, June 3rd.
Taco Tuesday, you might say.
I think that's a naughty word these days.
Oh man, we're in trouble already. We haven't even started. This is the Playbook Podcast. Good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing, Dasha?
Oh, I'm hanging in. I'm in California. If you're watching this, I have a slightly different backdrop. I'm in California for my sister's graduation. She's graduating from high school and going to UCLA for college. We're all very proud. She graduates tomorrow.
That is so lovely. Man, I wish I was doing that. I am moving house and all of my worldly goods have just arrived from the UK. We've been living in an Airbnb for the last 3 or 4 months.
Oh, are we going to get a new backdrop for you too?
We are going to get a new backdrop later this week. Excitingly, this slightly weird Airbnb
Yeah, some
artwork.
of our viewers have been complaining. So
I know. It's
don't worry.
mine.
Change is coming soon.
Yeah, change is coming. You ask, we listen. Absolutely. But at the moment, I have 167 boxes off a boat in a house around the corner. That's how much stuff we had. Anyway, none of you care about that. What you care about is the stories driving the day this morning. 3 big stories driving the day that we'll pick out for you. There's a theme here, Dasha, and the theme is we're watching and waiting for Donald Trump to do something.
Edge of our seats.
Literally, yeah, if you're as geeky as we are. The first one, Donald Trump is going to talk with Xi Jinping, the president of China, this week. We're pretty sure that could come as soon as today. When that happens, it's going to be a really big moment.
Remember he said he talked to him and then he hadn't actually talked to him? Well, now we think he's actually going to talk to him, and it's what everything is kind of hinging on at this point.
It's really interesting because the tariffs on China have obviously gone backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. China kind of feel like they're winning this tariff war, honestly. Like that's the vibe we're getting out of there. They think it's Trump that's backing out, and the whole taco thing we've talked about before. So this is kind of a pretty important conversation for Donald Trump's reputation. It needs to go well.
It is. And there were those early threats of they're the ones that need to pick up the phone. Well, tables have turned a little bit.
I entirely agree. So let's wait and see if that happens. The other thing we're waiting for this week, and big headline again when it comes, is a deal with Iran on Iran's nuclear program. This has been much discussed by administration officials and indeed by us on this podcast.
Yep.
Important story broke yesterday by colleagues over at Axios saying that the deal that is on the table from the US would give Iran limited low-level uranium enrichment capabilities. That is not what we had expected.
Right. But then Trump has now come out saying that's not happening. So this is a pattern I think we've seen as well. An outlet will report something, there'll be blowback, and then Trump will come out and say, no, that's not what's going on. And sometimes that does actually end up changing what the initial idea for the deal was.
Seems to be the president briefing against his own proposed deal, because other people have stood the story up since saying that, yes, indeed, that is basically the proposal America submitted to Iran last weekend. So, yeah.
Well, now the question is, does the actual proposal change based on Trump's Truth Social post?
Or, and let me throw this out there, does Trump's idea of we will not allow any enrichment of uranium, is there some sort of flexibility in what he actually means by that?
Interpretation.
Exactly.
Leave it to the reader.
Okay, and now the third and biggest thing that will dominate the news today, and frankly has been dominating the news all week, President Trump really starting to turn the screws on the Senate to get his one big, beautiful bill passed.
Yes.
The Senate, which returned yesterday from its week's holiday with the one big, beautiful bill now right before them. They have a deadline to get it passed this month. They've got basically 3.5 weeks to get it done. Donald Trump posting on Truth Social last night about 400 words of stream of consciousness, a lot of text, saying he wants this bill done by July the 4th on his desk. So that really doesn't give them very much time to do it. And the big row, Dasha, as far as I can see, is really about cuts to Medicaid, right?
It's Medicaid, it's deficit. So you've got Senator Ron Johnson saying he's worried about spending. You've got Senators Hawley and some others saying that they're worried about Medicaid. And you've got Leader Thune having to work through all of this and make sure that he can give Trump what it is that he wants. Now, what's interesting is there are different parts of the Republican Party and, of course, Democrats all interpreting the impacts of this bill very differently. Democrats are saying it is going to gut healthcare for millions of Americans. The message from the White House, and you can go back to what Dr. Oz told me, the CMS administrator, just a few days ago, the message from the White House is we are actually trying to preserve Medicaid by cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, by getting illegal immigrants off of Medicaid, and by putting in place work requirements that will take people who aren't contributing to society, who are able-bodied and should be working. Those people will not get Medicaid, and they don't deserve Medicaid. That's a very different kind of argument than Republicans have made in the past about this. But the realities of what this kind of sweeping change to the system will do could be very different than kind of how both parties have interpreted it.
And that's really the point I was getting to. I completely agree with that. Donald Trump has said repeatedly, we won't cut Medicaid, we shouldn't cut Medicaid. He's told them not to cut Medicaid. And yet in this bill, there is a big reduction in the amount of money the government's going to spend on Medicaid, and assessments suggest millions of people will no longer get coverage through Medicaid. So to most people's view, or many people's view, you could say, well, that's a cut. But what the White House seems to be saying is, that's not a cut. We're reducing waste in the system. We're reducing the number of illegal migrants that can use the system. We are saying to people, if you don't want to work, you don't get it. But that doesn't count as a cut, even though we are actually cutting money from the amount we spend on it, and we essentially will be cutting people off the bill.
Right. And the strategy is this messaging shift, and it's a messaging approach that Trump has used on a number of other issues, including the economy, including immigration, making this as like an us versus them issue, right? Saying like immigrants and people who aren't working don't deserve this kind of program. It's a very Trumpian approach to this whole thing. And so far, that message has been working with a lot of Republicans in the party. There are a lot of people that have gotten on board with the idea of work requirements and of taking undocumented immigrants off of the program.
The crucial question, I think, that's assuming this thing actually passes, which I think we have to assume it is eventually going to pass in some form.
What version of this? Yeah.
Indeed, is which side of that argument are the American voters going to end up on? Where do they really see it, right? Because this is going to be a big deal come the midterm elections next year. Will voters see it as, oh, the GOP have come back into power, they've cut Medicaid, and at the same time they're giving tax cuts to rich people, which is the Democrat messaging on it? Or will they agree with Donald Trump that basically there were too many people on Medicaid who shouldn't have been on it, and he would list illegal migrants, he would list people who aren't in work, and actually, yes, I don't want those people getting Medicaid that I'm having to fund, and I'm delighted the government's doing that, and therefore the GOP actually get a vote boost from that, and that's the gamble of this bill, right?
And the thing is, it is a messaging war until it's a ground reality, right? Until people start to feel the effects, positive or negative, it's going to be about how either side tells the story of what they are doing here. And right now, the challenge for Democrats is there isn't a leading messenger. There isn't this galvanized movement that's out there beating the drum, saying that this is going to be terrible for their American people. But you do have an increasingly cohesive message from the White House and from Trump allies about what this is. And it's kind of a nuanced argument here of like, yes, we need to make some changes. They're trying to avoid the word cuts, but they are cutting in some ways in order to preserve this program. So who is going to win out? How is that going to play? And how quickly? I mean, I am not expert enough, and this is some reporting that we're going to need to do, is like how quickly will these effects be felt in rural hospitals that are concerned about shutting down because of this, or people who are on Medicaid that need to prove that they are working or trying to get work? There's concern about the paperwork process and the administrative load that states and the federal government are going to have to handle as a result of some of these things. So how quickly the effects impact people, is that before midterms? That is a really big difference in terms of the political capital here, the political risk.
Absolutely. In the meantime, interesting to see just how much time Donald Trump seems to be devoting to this week, right? He didn't have any media planned yesterday. There isn't currently any media planned today, although let's see, you never know with this guy. But he was, as I say, on Truth Social last night, blasting out a series of posts about it. He met with John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, yesterday. He met with J.D. Vance, who, of course, in his role is the president of the Senate. And it seems he was working the phones as well.
Yeah, speaking with Ron Johnson, speaking with Hawley, and this is his big, beautiful priority, right? So you can imagine that that's going to continue through the rest of the week, especially if he wants to sign it by 4th of July.
It's an interesting phase of this sort of Trump 2.0 project we're suddenly in. We were talking the other day about him being just slightly quieter by his standards than he was in the first 100 days. I was looking back at a J.D. Vance interview in April where he said the first 100 days had been very, very active, but they'd gone with the sort of low-hanging fruit. And he said the next 100 days, i.e. the period we're in now, were going to be about getting this bill through Congress, and they were going to be about achieving foreign policy priorities, i.e. Iran, i.e. Ukraine. And that's a lot more stuff that tends to happen behind the scenes normally than the sort of big DOGE cuts and the big immigration moves that we saw in the first period.
Right. And it's really, really hard stuff, too.
Right.
That takes real consensus building. That's not just Trump sitting at the Resolute desk putting his big signature on an EO. This requires convincing people and putting pressure on people and being strategic about messaging both in front of the doors and behind those closed doors.
But it's something he's pretty good at with his party now, right? If you think back to the first term and John McCain and all that and the legislative attempts that failed in Congress, it's hard to see this bill not going through in some form in my mind. Donald Trump's just got too tight a grip on this party now.
And one thing that our colleagues in Congress are reporting too is that we're going to see text from this bill this week, but it's going to be rolled out in stages. And it's going to start, we talked about low-hanging fruit, it's going to start with the low-hanging fruit, and probably the last things that we'll see will be some of the more controversial parts of this legislation, i.e. Medicaid.
Should we do something fun to finish, Dasha? We were going to say happy birthday to Jill Biden, and we should say happy birthday to Jill Biden.
Happy birthday, Jill Biden.
But that's a bit too quick. So tell us something else you've spotted that's fun out of the Playbook newsletter today.
Well, we have a spotted from my White House colleague, Sophia Kai. Usha Vance made a little trip to Grace Street Coffee for her iced latte. Always fun to see a second lady out and about, especially given how little we see of the first lady. Usha seems to be putting herself out there a little bit more, getting her caffeine intake.
She does. My next door neighbor in the Airbnb that I'm just in the process of moving out of spotted Usha Vance at our local supermarket the other day.
Oh, okay.
So she's clearly, roaming the city. And so that's 2 sightings.
So she grocery shops because President Trump is still seems to be hung up on the idea of groceries and what the word means and how old-fashioned it is. It seems like Usha's familiar with the grocery.
That's my word, not hers, to be fair. She may, I don't know. I don't know her well enough to know whether she says groceries. But what it really struck me, it was like, this is quite a small town, isn't it? That you just see these people around. Like when I was working in London, you did not bump into politicians very often.
I was just talking to our colleague, Julia Marsh, one of our editors here who's moving to Washington. And she's been here about a week. And she's like, I keep seeing people I know everywhere I go. I'm like, in New York, that was not a thing. Here, anywhere you go, it's guaranteed. There's nowhere to hide.
Aren't we lucky? Nowhere to hide from Playbook. Yeah, it's definitely good news for us. I don't know if it's such good news for the politicians. Anyway, we better leave it there, Dasha. Thank you very much for that. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. And we'll be back with you tomorrow, maybe from a new house. Who knows? We'll see how it goes. Have a great Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.